You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back to the show. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I am Mighty Blue, and I don't believe that I'm currently having a midlife crisis. You never know, of course. In our show, we interview all sorts of hikers who have or want to have the experience of carving 4 to 7 months out of their life to walk over 2,000 miles. In cold, rain, snow, heat, black flies, and pretty dire conditions sometimes. Yet all of them, without exception, find it the most thrilling, most joyous, and most community-based time of their lives. We normally concentrate on the Appalachian Trail, hence the title of the show, I guess, but I'm occasionally drawn westwards, and this week is another of those times. One of our previous guests, J.C. Van Etten, better known to his hiking friends as Kathmandu, wrote to me to tell me about today's guest. He wanted me to meet Caroll Coyne, or Cheer. As you're going to hear soon, there's something that Caroll is doing that immediately tickled my inquisitive nature, and I soon got on the phone, arranged a recording, and she'll be joining us shortly. Just as a clue, Caroll is doing something that will be of interest to hikers of any long-distance trail. Also today, Catherine Herndon-Powell is back on, this time with the tricky subject of play it safe physical distance while hiking. I think that this is a great subject to discuss, particularly as there are going to be at least 10 times the number of thru-hikers going this year, as opposed to those who carried on going last year. If you recall, a lot of people heeded ATC's warning last year and aborted their hikes, leaving about 250 thru-hikers who continued. It was this small number last year that probably stopped the AT from turning into its own super spreader event. I don't see much evidence that the warning will be heeded this year, so Catherine will be giving advice on how to handle this tricky problem. And finally today, Larry Luxenburg's Walking the Appalachian Trail emphasises what I've certainly learned on my 2 thru-hikes. You can have the best gear in the world, you can have the best physical preparation in the world, but if you have the wrong attitude, you're going to find it tough to go the distance on any of these trails. So let's get to it. Meet Caroll Coyne, or Cheer. Now, I know that we mainly highlight the Appalachian Trail on the show, and we sometimes do chat with people from the other side. So let's introduce you today to a recent PCT thru-hiker. But she did it over 2019 and 2020, so she's got a different story to tell. This is Caroll Coyne, or Cheer. Hey, Caroll, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you today?
I'm not bad at all. Now, one of our AT guests, Kathmandu, who was a recent guest on my show, was also a recent guest on your podcast. And Kat said that I should chat with you. So we're going to talk about the podcast later. But first, I thought I'd talk to you about your PCT hike. What first brought that onto your radar?
So my mom actually used to backpack when she was younger. And so I would look at her pictures. This was when I was in college. I'd go back through her picture books and look at her photos. And I thought it was so cool that she did that. And so I've always been into the outdoors, going to Yosemite growing up, but I never really got into hiking deep until 2017. And part of that was inspired by my mom. So I did this thing in Southern California called the 6-Pack Peak of Challenge, or what was it called? 6-Pack Peaks Challenge.
Yeah, that would kill me as well, yeah, especially after a couple of drinks.
It's such a tongue twister. I promise I'm not drunk right now. And so I joined that challenge in 2017. And there's a lot of peaks in Southern California you can hike, like San Jacinto, which is along the PCT. So I did that challenge, and that kind of spurred it on. And so got into hiking, but I'd never backpacked before.
But exactly. It's not the same, is it? You can hike and you can climb, but it's not the same as backpacking, spending all that period of time in the woods. So where did that come from? Because for us AT hikers, we've got the walk in the woods. You've got wild, I guess. Is that the thing that turned you onto it, or was it something else?
So a lot of people did watch Wild and then they were inspired. I did see that movie, but that's not what inspired me to hike the trail. I had that in my mind I knew about the PCT before that movie, but even 10 months before I hiked the PCT, I didn't really have it in my mind. I was involved with a group called Women Who Hike, and there was just an information session actually along the PCT. So a bunch of women met at this. It was at Vesquez Rocks. And I just went to meet other hikers, but it was about the PCT. So that planted a seed too. And then, 10 months later, I was on the PCT.
That's still a ridiculous transition, by the way. So, you say it wasn't a passion of yours when you were younger, something you wanted to do for years. You just decided you could do it. So what was it about the idea that really attracted you to actually do it? The thought of, getting out of yourself for effectively 5 or 6 months.
Yeah. So I did start dabbling in backpacking with one of my friends, and she, at the time we were backpacking in the Sierra. We just did a little overnight on the western side of the Sierra, and I was kind of unhappy at my job. I come from a finance background, and so I was kind of unhappy, felt a little stagnant in my life. I wanted some adventure, and she was like, well, I'm hiking the PCT next year, next year. So because this was in 2018. So we were backpacking and dabbling in that. And she's like, you should come with me. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I should. And so it was just this like decision right then and there that I was going to do this. So I started
real life
researching.
People don't do that, don't you? I mean, it's a particularly crazy thing to suddenly say that you suddenly want to do it. But perhaps it's a combination of things, your life not, feeling a bit stagnant, as you say. So, but what allowed you, because you're in your early 30s, so what allowed you to...
Yeah, I'm 34.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. I've been very polite. Did you notice that? You're in your early 30s.
Yeah, thank you. I'm fine
you're
telling
barely
my age
30.
To everybody.
You're barely 30, let's say then. So, so you were in a job you wanted to move out of. Did you not worry about the consequences of moving out of a job? And then once again, my listeners know that I'm so impressed by people who are prepared to say, sod it, I'm going to do something different. So how were you able to get through that thought process? Because I presume you're doing reasonably well at that time.
Yeah. So I was making decent income at my job. I had savings. And then I decided 10 months before that I was going to do this. So I was able to save up, and I was able to keep my job until a couple months before I went on my hike. So I made the decision early enough to where I could save up for that.
Sure.
So financially, I was able to do it. And then I lived by myself in a place called San Clemente in Southern California. So I knew I had to move back in, with my parents or have them keep my stuff for a while. And so I had a lot of support from my family. That's the only reason I was able to do it.
So because of and women do have different set of circumstances to look at when they go hiking than men do. So was your mother, because you said she was a hiker herself, was she on board with your idea that this was a good adventure for you?
My mom was on board. I was really afraid to tell them, though. I decided I was going to hike the PCT.
And then tell them.
Like 7 months before I actually told almost anybody. I told a couple of my good friends, but I didn't tell anybody else because I was afraid of, I was at the time 32. And so, I'm an adult, but still I'm a baby in their eyes, no matter how old I am.
Yeah, you're always going to be.
Right. So I was afraid of what they were going to think. So my mom actually was totally on board. My dad was very worried. Like, he didn't even really respond when I told him. So I knew I just had to give it some time and come back and then talk to him again about it. And eventually he was all stoked on it. But I did tell him, because he was worried for my safety, of course. So I told him, like, okay, there's this device. It's called the Garmin InReach. And so I bought that early.
You can buy it for me, Dad.
Yeah, that's right. No, it was a kind of a big expense I had to save up for. My parents supported me in other ways. Like, they were my storage unit for so long. Sure. So I was like, you guys, you're doing enough. But it wasn't cheap, but it was so worth it. And so I went on a couple of shakedown hikes before my trek so he could get comfortable with that.
Right. So was your gear by then, because you've done some backpacking, as you say, the shakedown hikes, was it dialed in pretty well for when you started the trail, or did you need further advice? Because, as we said, backpacking is different to hiking, and hiking is different to climbing. So what did you have to change, you think, to spend 5 months on the trail? Yeah,
so I did 2 shakedown hikes before my hike. So one of them was a 5-day, 4-night, which was great because I could really test my gear. Sure. So I started with an Osprey Exos, which was great for so many reasons, but I ended up switching I ended up switching that out just because I wanted something waterproof and lighter. So I switched over to a hyperlight. So I switched that. So I kind of worked out the kinks on these shakedown hikes. So I switched that out. I switched my tent out. So I started with
basically the main things. Yeah.
The main thing. So I definitely recommend doing shakedown hikes before something. So because I did these shakedown hikes, I was able to really hone in my gear. And so I kept a lot of my gear throughout the trail, and it's still going strong.
I'm interested actually then. So you did the shakedown hikes. What was it about those hikes that made you realize it was important to change some gear? Was it literally the waterproof nature?
That was part of it. And my hiking partner, who I started with for 2 weeks, my friend who was doing it as well, she had a hyperlight. And so I was kind of like checking her backpack out as we were hiking. And I was like, oh, wait, it's waterproof. And mine wasn't. And I like the simplicity of that pack. And so I got to see her hike with that pack. And I realized that's what I wanted to.
What about the tent? You changed that up from what to what?
I had an REI quarter dome, which was great. It was still a little heavy for my liking. And so I switched over to a Big Agnes Copper Spur UL1.
Cool. You've gone for all the sort of main tents that are on there on the trail.
Yes.
I noticed in the Half Dome was one of the big ones in 2019 when I went. So it's
oh really?
It follows from trail to trail. Yeah, absolutely does. Yeah. So you didn't know a massive amount about backpacking. How did you prepare physically for this trip? And in fact, how do you prepare mentally, or do you prepare mentally?
Yeah. So physically, I've always been active. I used to be a dancer. I like to run. And so I wasn't doing anything crazy before because I didn't want to injure myself. So I was running like maybe 3 miles 3 to 4 times a week. I wasn't going crazy on it. So that's all I was really doing to prepare physically. Wow. Yeah. Mentally was kind of a bigger preparation. So I bought this book called the Pacific Crest Trails. And so
Zach Davis, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I think there's one for the Appalachian Trail maybe, and the Continental Divide. So I bought the PCT one specifically. So I thought that was a great resource. And I went through their little exercises of like, why do you want to hike this trail? It went into what is your why, which was so great. So that was really helpful.
Hang on. What's your answer?
What was that?
What was your answer?
Oh, there were a lot of answers. So it's funny. I actually was going through my photos because I took a photo of each. There was like 3 exercises that I went through in this book. Right. And so I wrote everything, or I printed out I think you could do a printout or whatever. So I took photos of them so I could look back on them as I was hiking the trail so I wouldn't forget. But it's interesting because some of the reasons why I was hiking the trail changed over time. Like once I set foot on the trail, within 2 weeks, some of them changed. So for example, I'm actually embarrassed to say this, but I put... Good. Keep that going.
We're
getting real.
Yeah, we love that, yeah.
So I'm embarrassed, but I put to get trail cred.
I've got to tell you, everybody, she's blushing right now, just so
I am, yes. I'm like embarrassed I even wrote this. And I lo and behold, I'm sharing this on a podcast now.
Knock yourself out. There you go.
But okay, so I put things like... to find out why I'm here. So those I'm not embarrassed about those, but to kind of have an adventure in my life again. So those were kind of the main things that were consistent throughout the trail. And also community was a huge one too, which I was not disappointed with at all. But the one I'm embarrassed about is I put to get trail cred. Like literally that's what I wrote. Trail cred.
Yeah, you deserve to be embarrassed about that.
Yes, I know. It's so embarrassing. And within a week on the trail, I was like, why did I write this? And so like, I didn't really look back on that after because I was like, this isn't what it's about. It's not about what other people think about me, to get trail cred. Like, oh, I want everybody to think I'm cool because I'm crushing like 20 miles a day in the first 2 weeks. That's not what it's about. And I realized very quickly that that was not one of my reasons to be on trail.
You get very internalized, don't you, within your head when you start, especially in those early days, you start thinking about things and why you're here. And you've spoken to your friends, you're going away, your family that you're going away, and suddenly it's just you and your gear and the trail. That's all there is there. And you're the one who learns how to look after yourself in the wild, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a very, for me at least, very spiritual experience. I feel like I found...
Is that spiritual, religious, or non-religious, or entirely secular?
Personally, for me, it was kind of non-religious, spiritual in the sense that like maybe nature is where I go to be spiritual. Does that make sense?
Cool. Yeah, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've heard people said like that. I think we all experience the trail differently, and one of the things I'm going to come to later on is how we experience it differently at different ages. But and we know you're in your barely 30.
Thank you.
So how did you approach the logistics of a hike? Because on the AT, it's really easy to work out how to get gear and food and stuff like that. But I know from trying to do the John Muir Trail a couple of times and failing a couple of times that that the logistics of that are quite difficult. How did you learn about it, and then how did you work out how to do it?
Yeah, the logistics. I actually got pretty deep into it with my trail partner. We didn't stay together, but we planned together because we kind of knew maybe we would part ways. So we used a lot of different resources online to plan. There's this really great resource called Craig's PCT Planner.
Right.
If anybody out there is going to hike the PCT, I definitely recommend going on there because you it's like a way to plan your hike and plan where you're going to stop into. And so we got really deep into that.
What was your longest day then without food?
Oh, okay.
Not longest day. What was your longest period rather?
Stretch.
Without food?
So actually, I hiked most of the PCT in 2019, and I went back to finish a little section in 2020 because I flipped.
Sure.
In 2019 because the snow was kind of intense, river crossings were dangerous. So I got out of the Sierra. So I finished a little section in 2020. And so that's through what you're talking about, the John Muir Trail, the Sierra section. And so of course my longest stretch was right out the gate, like from the couch in quarantine to the Sierra. We did a 9-day stretch through the Sierra because we didn't want to stop into too many towns because of COVID. It was the summer, so COVID wasn't as bad and everything was open, but we still wanted to be careful about that. So we didn't stop in many towns. And so our first stretch was 9 days, just out the gate.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's 9 days worth of food, and you have to have a bear canister as well, don't you?
That's right.
So how do you fit? Is connect? I mean, I'll tell you what. The reason I say this, and once again, listeners won't know, but right next to me right now is a bear canister.
There it is.
I was talking about it yesterday with somebody, and they're not big enough to take a lot of food, really. So how did you plan that out?
So we kind of planned so we did have a lot of food, and I actually managed to fit most of it into my bear can. Cool. I had a bag that I could hang for the overflow. And so what I tried to do, and almost every stretch I tried to do this, the first night out, I would pig out. Like I would just eat a lot of stuff the first night out so I wouldn't have to stuff it into my bear can overnight. So I would pig out the first night. And then we planned on getting into town for like lunchtime. So we could kind of hold out. We could just have a breakfast for that last day and then pig out in town. So that's kind of our method, but I did have to hang a little bit of the overflow. I think it was just the first night or maybe the first 2 nights.
I'm impressed. I wouldn't know how to do that, to be honest with you. I really wouldn't. Now, you mentioned you went with somebody. Tell us how that actually went, because I would imagine when you're preparing to go, you've got in your mind how it's going to be, and you'll be hiking with somebody and spending and camping near that same person. But that didn't happen, did it? You were with each other for a couple of weeks. So why did that break up? What was the reason for that?
Yeah, I think it just boiled down to different hiking styles. Right. So I hiked with my friend, like little backpacking trips multiple times, but I'd never hiked, a long stretch. And so she was on a time frame, like she had to be done by a certain time and I did not. Right. So I kind of wanted to be more social. I wanted to talk to people, and she was just like crushing it. And so I was having a hard time keeping up with that. So, and I wanted to go a little slower. So that's kind of the reason why after 2 weeks.
I kind of wondered, we talked about this before, because I would have guessed any father would be nervous about his daughter going. You said, I'm going with my friend, I'll be okay. But you knew she'd be going after 2 weeks. So that, you weren't going to be by yourself. Did it give you pause at all that did you feel quite comfortable after 2 weeks being by yourself?
I did. Yeah. I really got into a rhythm, and on the PCT, in a normal year, the desert portion, if you're going northbound, I always say the desert is a party. because there's always people around. I was always talking to the people I was hiking around, just so I knew, like, if I needed help, like I knew somebody was up ahead of me or behind me. So I'd always talk to the people, and I hardly ever camped alone on the Pacific Crest Trail. Like
Really?
it was
I'm
rare,
surprised.
especially the desert section specifically.
Right.
I had to try to camp alone, which I did. And I love to camp with other people. So it wasn't a worry for me after 2 weeks. And I hiked at that point. I was alone for 2 weeks after that. I wasn't really like hiking around anybody specific. And then I met a couple people that I continued to hike with, which became my trail family.
You said you got into the rhythm, and we've often talked about on the show about the rhythm of your hike and so on. I understand that you'd want to keep going and so on, but hiking with somebody is distinctly different to hiking by yourself, isn't it? How did that manifest itself with you? Did you enjoy it more, or did you think to yourself, I wish he was still here?
I actually I enjoyed hiking by myself because I actually did want that experience. So I had 2 weeks that I was hiking by myself. And then I met my friend Calzone, who we hiked thousands of miles together after that. Right. So I prefer hiking with friends and others because I feel like I can share that experience with somebody. It makes it more special for me. I know that's not for everybody. Some people love to solo hike and that's it. Yeah. But I was happy to have that solo time, but I prefer most of the time to hike with somebody else.
It seems that virtually all the trails, you can spend as much time as you like with somebody and as much time as you like by yourself, can't you? So the balance is perfect. Nobody ever needs to worry about there being too many people around. They can find as much space as they wish. And was it Calzone who, somebody asked you a question early on, they said, are you a camper or a hiker? And that changed your mindset a little bit. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I guess we'll go into this later, but thru-r, which is the community that I started, we have these thru crew meetups via Zoom. So hikers could come and talk to each other. And so an expert on like snow hiking and river crossings comes on once in a while. His name's Ned Tibbetts. Cool. And so he gave us a really great tip. And he just said, before you start hiking a long trail, decide if you're a hiker or a camper. And so the hikers out there are the ones that are like crushing it. Maybe they're doing like 40 miles in Oregon on the PCT, and they're like really driven to like get from point A to point B. But then there's the campers that see a beautiful meadow, and maybe they've only gone 10 miles, but they're going to stop there and have a long lunch, or they're going to stop and camp there for the night because it's gorgeous. So I identified myself as a camper and everybody I ended up hiking with were campers too. All the people in my trail family were all similar in that way.
It's funny, actually. I certainly on the AT, I'd never did that, and I should have done. I once or twice I stopped, not in a meadow, but on the top of a mountain somewhere and camped. But really, I would tend to find myself in a shelter because the shelter system is different in the AT, I'm sure. And everybody has way too much time to think on the trail. Did you do a lot of that? And did you resolve any issues that you were thinking about? And because I've got to say, for me, I remember in Georgia thinking, I've got all this time to work out all the various issues I want to work out. And then I got into Maine and I thought, I'm there, oh my God, I haven't worked it all out. I'd resolved nothing. What about you? Did you find yourself doing that, or did you think, I've got plenty of time to do it?
I love this question. So I was the same way. I was like, I'm going to have so much time to figure my life out. I'm going to have everything figured out by the time I reach the northern terminus, which I think a lot of people probably buy into. Yeah. But I remember early on in the trail when I was hiking alone, I was in Big Bear for my resupply and all that. And I went to the laundromat to clean my clothes. And another hiker was in there. His name's Jukebox from Germany. And so we were talking and I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm going to have everything figured out by the time I'm done with this. And he's like, he had done a thru hike in Germany. And he was like, Caroll, you're going to have more questions than you have answers when you're done. And I didn't really understand. I was like, oh, okay, like, great, I guess. I didn't really understand what he was saying. But then once I finished, I was like, he was right. I have so many more questions than I do answers.
But, it opens up so many possibilities, though, doesn't it? Those thoughts open up all sorts of possibilities.
Right. And it's great. It's great because I feel like I'm more open-minded now. And I feel like I did figure certain things out, like starting thru-r, for example. That came to me on the trail in a different form, but that I got an answer there, but I still had so many questions on how to figure out how to take action on it.
Yeah, but
So
you know
that's,
what?
I guess, an
You
example.
you just need to have that thought though. The rest of it can be worked out another time. So you've
Right.
got that thought written down. You know you want to do it. You can put that in the back of your mind to when you finish and you're ready to implement it. I certainly understand that. But and you mentioned the bit desert earlier on. I just want to go back to that a second. I know that when I watched all Dixie's videos when she did the PCT, and I'm sure I think you said you'd seen them as well.
Yes.
Getting water from cattle troughs is about as bad a thing as I can ever imagine doing. Did you have to do that as well?
I'm trying to think the sketchiest water source. No cattle troughs, luckily.
Oh,
I know
good.
that's,
Lucky you.
I think that's common on the CDT.
I think she also did it. I think she also did it on the PCT.
Okay, she probably did. I avoided those. I would look ahead to see where I was, like how much water I needed for the next, stretch, and I would avoid the cattle troughs. It was pretty wet in 2019, so we didn't have too many issues with water sources.
All right. That's nice.
But there was one water source that on Gut Hook, it said there was a dead bear inside. It was like a trough, but it was kind of closed. And there was like one area you could get the water. So I was like, yeah, we're going to skip that one. So that was probably, I would never get water from something like that unless I was desperate.
That's hilarious.
But no cattle troughs.
So 2019, you went up towards the Sierra. You flipped up to Oregon, Washington, I guess.
I actually flipped up to a place called Chester in Northern California.
All right. Okay. And then you carried on going up. Okay.
Yes.
So when did you decide to flip then? Did you see there was so much snow already, or did you start heading into it and then thought, sorry, I can't do that, and came out? How did that work out for you?
Yeah. So I entered the Sierra with, I think 5 other people.
Right.
And I was kind of worried about going in by myself. I wouldn't do that. And so if I didn't find anybody to go in with, I wasn't going to go in. I was going to flip up to like Chester or Oregon or something. But I found some people to go in with. And a lot of them were my trail family members from the desert section.
Sure.
Nice. And so one of the people in our group knew how to hike through snow. He grew up in the Sierra. He knew how to cross rivers. So he was very comfortable doing those sort of things. And he was willing to teach us what to do and help us out before we went over Forester Pass, for example. So we went for 110 miles through the Sierra, but we entered the Sierra on June 3rd. And so it all of a sudden got really hot and all of the snow was melting at a rapid rate. That's not the time to be, which I learned later from Ned Tibbetts, that's not the time to be in the Sierra. Because it's dangerous. The river crossings are dangerous. And so we were like some of the only people in the Sierra at that point. We didn't see many hikers at all. Wow. So we decided that we should get out because of safety issues. We didn't want to push it too far.
Where'd you get out? Mammoth Lakes?
So we got out at a really obscure pass called Taboose Pass. It's between Pinchot Pass and Mather Pass. Right. It's like nobody takes this pass, or hardly anybody does. So that was an adventure in itself.
I bet it was. So, yes. But you flipped up and you finished at the northern terminus, I presume.
Yes.
Tell us about finishing at the northern terminus, because you talked to me about it the other day, and it was really interesting to me because it doesn't look that exciting, but you made it sound so damn good. I want you to tell listeners what it was like.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember how far we camped the night before we hit the northern terminus. I think we were maybe 13 miles from the terminus the night before. Nice. So we had a 13-mile stretch to get to the terminus. I think it might have been a little bit more. It might have been 15. But the walk into the northern terminus I go back in my dreams to this because it's like one of the most beautiful days I've experienced on trail. Sure. So 8 miles before the northern terminus is this like expansive view of the mountains. And so we decided to take a breakfast coffee break there.
Sure.
And it was one of my favorite memories on trail because the view was just the most amazing view I think I've seen on trail. And from then on out, the views it's kind of like a green tunnel after that. So, going in, it's just a lot of trees and stuff. So we really, if you're a PCT hiker and you're making your way over to the northern terminus, I suggest to stop at the last viewpoint before you head in because it's just so amazing. And then the terminus itself is just surrounded in trees, but it's really cool too because there's like the border, all the trees are cut where the border is. Yeah. So that's great too. But yeah, it's just the colors in Washington are like nothing I've ever seen. There's a lot of, at least the time we were in there, which was mid-September, there's a lot of like yellows and greens. And I've just never seen colors like that on a landscape or in landscape. So there was a lot of that going on too on the way to the northern terminus, but the views are just amazing. So 8 miles before the terminus, stop there if you're going to hike the PCT. That's one to stop at.
Okay.
Yes.
Good to know. So you came out the following year. And did COVID impact your decision? Did you put it off? Because you had to, you did it in a certain period of time, I guess. So what happened? You came back to where you'd left off at that funny name pass you told me about earlier on?
Permits were issued from the PCT, and they usually issue in October and January. So I ended up getting my permit in January. And so I was like, okay, we're good to go. But then COVID happened.
Sure.
And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to hike at that point. And so maybe like 2 weeks before I actually decided this is a go, because I did a lot of research to make sure the places I was going to go, was going to hike, were open for backpacking, open for hiking. And then the towns were open. So luckily that gave me a green light and I was able to finish it. So we entered, Taboose Pass was closed due to a wildfire. Right. So we actually retraced our steps a little bit and entered in Kearsarge Pass.
Right.
And we hiked all the way up to Truckee.
I saw one of those videos today, actually, a Kearsarge, when you got into Kearsarge Pass.
Oh, yeah. So, beautiful pass.
What a great opening picture that was. Incredible.
Yeah.
It was. And just before we talk about the podcast, we also talked about how different it must be to hike any long distance trail at different ages. Do you think you could have done this at 18? Or do you think that maybe you got a different set of experiences and lessons from doing it at this age to what you might have got if you'd done it at 18?
I feel like if I did something like this at 18, my life trajectory would have been totally different, which I don't regret at all. Sure. I'm glad I did it in my 30s, I think, because I felt like I was getting in a rut. And, you know, I also felt like all the goals that I set for myself had been met at that point. And so I was like, well, what's next? I need some adventure in my life. So nice. I think if I did something like this earlier, it would have changed maybe even what I did for a living.
Yeah, how about that? Isn't that amazing? Yeah, I'd never thought of it before, you know, and I only did it when I was old, so it didn't make much difference to me. But would you think you might have been a backpacker and not a camper then?
I think, yes. I think maybe I would have been more concerned with like crushing it every day and that sort of thing at 18. But I think, yeah, in my 30s, I maybe wanted to enjoy a little bit more and slow it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you finished and you came back and you started consulting, I believe, still in the financial services area, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So, but you missed community. And I know that was one of the things you said early on. And I think actually, it was the video on your website. It was about community that you'd kind of fallen in love with. So what did you do about it? How did you decide? You had this thought of through is it -r.com?
Yeah, thru-r. It's short for thru-hiker.
Yeah.
It's
I got the concept,
name.
Yeah.
It's a fanciful name.
You got thru-r.com. But it's not just podcasts, and the podcast wasn't the first thought, was it? How did you set this up, and what's it all about?
Right. Yeah. So after I got off trail, I went through post-trail depression, which I know a lot of people go through, and I really just missed the community. You know, when you get back from a long hike, you talk to your friends about it, you talk to your family about it, you geek out, and then their eyes just glaze over after like 5 minutes.
I always tell people, tell everybody your stories for about 3 weeks, because after it, they will not want to know at all.
They do not care anymore.
They don't care at all.
So I was like, I'm craving the community. Like, I can't face the fact that I can't talk to my people anymore, my hiker friends. Yeah. So I started thru-r. And I started with Zoom meetups, specifically for the class of 2020, because a lot of people had to cancel their hikes.
Sure.
So
is it just for the PCT, or is it for all other trails?
It's for all trails, all thru-hikers, all aspiring thru-hikers. So it's for new and experienced thru-hikers. And sure. I can get into that later about the background. But the first meetup I had was a PCT 2020 support group. So I started with the PCT because I know the PCT. You got to start with what you know. And this thru-r is less than a year old. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to build slowly, but the idea is to expand to all trails. So that would be amazing to do in the future. But I started with the PCT 2020 support group, and a lot of people joined the group or joined the Zoom meeting. And it was just so great to talk to people
Were they feeling
that
the
were
same as
interested.
you? Were they feeling the same as you? Were they getting sort of down about not having someone to bore to death about a trail?
Right. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of brand awareness and that sort of thing. So I was the only experienced hiker on, and I was just answering people's questions and providing support for them. And so then I decided to offer meetings like that for alumni hikers, because I'm an alumni hiker and I miss talking to other hikers. So the alumni group actually is really amazing these days. Like, there's so many people that come on over and over again. It's becoming a community now, which is great. But a lot of the hikers are PCT, but like Kathmandu was an AT hiker.
That's right.
So he gets on all the time and he's so great. But yeah, kind of the point of Thru-r, it started with the Zoom meetups, and it's really to help new hikers prepare for their hikes and to provide community for the alumni hikers. So sometimes we'll get on and we'll have a lot of alumni hikers on that can give answers to the new hikers' questions. So it's a support group for everybody, really.
So being a Zoom meeting, and I'm sure you've seen it on PCT Facebook pages as well, there's a lot of angst and anxiety and also anger about certain decisions that are made. Do you find it's easier to control that sort of bullshit stuff that you get on Facebook, because they can actually see each other? They're not just sitting behind a screen, not being seen.
That's part of the point of this whole thing, is to provide community where there's a face behind the picture, the profile picture, there's a face behind the name. Sure. So, if you're on a Zoom call, you want to call somebody out, maybe you won't do that because, it's a person and I actually like this person.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's easier to control, and we're all very open to each other's ideas. It's very supportive. And we also have a private Facebook group just for the people who get on the Zoom meetings. Right. And so we kind of cut the crap out. We cut out the non-supportive nature of some of this.
You run that part of things. And
I do.
And if people start arguing badly, you get rid of them.
Yeah, and that's actually never happened yet. Cool. We'll see. But
PCT must be a lot kinder than the AT then, in that case.
We'll see. Well, I think it does help, because anybody who gets on the calls they can join this group, but I have to make sure, I check to make sure they actually were on the call.
Oh, right. Interesting.
So it's very I say exclusive, because it's just for the people who are on the calls.
Cool. So why the podcast then? Do you feel that's something that adds something different to the Zoom calls, or what is the podcast supposed to be about?
So the podcast, it's kind of, I guess, similar to the Zoom meetups, where it's a way to share stories, which is what you do. You share stories.
Sure.
And so I thought that would be a great way to share more stories and go more one-on-one with people, like Kathmandu. He was my first guest, and I felt like I really got to know him so well one-on-one. And now other people can get to know him so well. And he had great just great things to say about hiking.
He's a terrific guest. One of the Togs and Lucky hiked with Kat, and they said he's an evolved human being.
He really is.
No one's ever said that about me, let me tell you.
Me neither.
I mean, evolved. That's a pretty nice thing to say about somebody, I'll tell you. So what's the longer term vision of both the podcast and thru-r.com, or is the podcast just part of the whole project?
The podcast is part of the whole. Yeah, it's part of the whole. So it's almost, because on the podcast, I'm going to say, join our community. We have Zoom meetups, the point of this whole thing. So the podcast is part of the whole. We have the Zoom meetups. We have a lot of fun resources on the website. We have a blog. We might do a video school eventually. I have a lot of long-term plans for this, but I'm only one person at this point. Maybe eventually I can hire people. I don't know, but I'm trying to go one step at a time. So we have a lot of things that we offer online right now, and we have more we're going to offer later. But the point is really to help new hikers prepare for their treks and provide community for the alumni hikers, or the experienced hikers. So the podcast is just part of sharing the stories. And so the podcast specifically, we're going to share experienced hiker stories like Kathmandu, but we're also going to get new hikers on to kind of share their stories and kind of why they want to hike. And we're hoping to get trail correspondents to update us as they hike along the PCT.
That's have somebody fun. I've done that on this show. It really works out pretty well, I tell you. I've enjoyed doing that. Oh, it's pretty cool. So that's the longer term vision for this thing. But of course, if you're going to go to different trails, are you actually going to need to do them yourself as well, aren't you? You got your plans in this year to go hiking?
That's something that I'm struggling with. I would love to do all 3 trails just so I know, because that's why I'm starting with the PCT, because I know the PCT. But the problem is I have a job, like, I consult part-time for corporate finance. So
Sure.
that's the part where I'm not sure how to navigate. I'm not like monetizing Thru-r. This is all free for everybody. Sure. And so if that's something I'm able to do just for the purposes of me giving back and going through that experience myself, being able to support the community better that way, I'm going to have to figure that out. And I don't have it figured out.
I gotta tell you, the podcast will give you all sorts of issues you need to address.
Right.
You've got. I've looked at it, and the reason I wanted to have you as a guest on the show really was that I'd seen what you'd done with it, and I thought it was quite an expensive idea. And I admire you for doing it. I think it's a sort of thing I perhaps should do with this show as well, but I just haven't got the intellectual bandwidth to do it right now. But look, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I really thank you for talking to us about it. And what I'm going to do is put the links in the show notes. It's called thru-r.com, which is thru-r.com, right? And you'll send me all the links, and if people want to join your Zoom meetings, they're welcome to. Is that right?
Yes, they're welcome. Yes.
That is cool. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
Did you notice that she kind of glossed over the fact that she got post-trial depression? I know that several of you don't think it's a real thing, but it seems to be prevalent in many of my guests, and in Caroll's case, she decided that she wanted to come up with a kind of antidote for that feeling of loss that most of us experience after half a year out of society. So she started putting people together again. I think it's an interesting concept, and I'll certainly be watching and dropping in myself from time to time. Before we get on to our friends at the ATC, thanks again go to our wonderful supporters. This week, we continued to receive monthly donations from Ann Dobson, Mike DiCello, Terry Hackler, and, of course, Jenny Grunke, whose name I now know how to pronounce. Also, we had donations from Jens Lieberheider, William Matthews, Anthony Moore, and a very generous donation from Ralph Buckley. Thanks to each one of you. Your generosity supporting the show continues to humble me every single week. If you'd like to show your support of a cup of coffee or 2 a month or a one-off donation, go to hikingradionetwork.com and click on one of the many donate buttons on the site. And while you're there, check out one of the other 5 podcasts that we now have available. There's the Trail Danes podcast, Just a Section Hiker, both of which are weekly shows like mine, as well as 3 other complete hikes following Dixie, RTK and JR. I'm sure you'll find something to fill in the long hours between my shows. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to the show on whichever platform you access podcasts. We've got all the links there, and subscribing to the show not only guarantees that you never miss an episode, it also helps us in the algorithms that keep our show in the spotlight. By the way, if I sounded like I had no idea what I was talking about at the end of that last sentence, you're right. I didn't, but it's apparently true. Now, let's hear from Catherine Herndon Powell and her ideas for Play It Safe, physical distance while hiking. Here's Catherine. I'd like to welcome back somebody who's become a bit of a regular contributor to the show on behalf of the ATC. This is Catherine Herndon Powell. Hey, Catherine. Thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again.
Actually, we're going to be really honest here. We actually recorded this yesterday, but both mine and Catherine's audio wasn't great, so we thought we'd do it again. And as I just told Catherine, luckily for me, I don't remember a bloody thing, because I never do remember anything. So let's start with it. ATC recently confirmed that, like the 2020 through hikes, that 2021 was another season. It's going to be another season, not recognising those who choose to through hike, while at the same time they're putting out more and more guidance and how-tos for those who are still going to be out there. And I said last week that I reckon the numbers this year could be at least 10 times the number who stayed on trail last year. What sort of problems do you envisage, and what can hikers do to keep their physical distance? And I'd like to break this down into 3 sections. Let's start with when hikers are actually on the trail between shelters and are hiking with one another.
Sure, yeah. So, every year there's a lot of impacts that can happen when the trail is really crowded, that can really be not the greatest experience for the hiker, as well as, cause problems for water quality and for the vegetation and everything in those campsites and shelter areas, especially in Georgia. But that's only going to be worse this year if we have a sort of a typical or more even greater than typical number of folks attempting a northbound through hike. So, a lot of it is what you think about happening at shelters in March and April, where you've got people trying to set up their tents kind of on top of each other, guy lines crossing.
Almost literally.
Yeah. I know. I hiked in 2006, which was not at all the numbers that we've had in 2018, 2019. And I think it was my second or third night out. I camped. My whole tent got flooded because I was forced to camp in a spot that I knew was at the bottom of a drain, and it was flat enough, but you could see that the water was going to come down the hill. And sure enough, rained overnight and came right into my tent. So, things like that are going to be part of the experience. Lots of mud and just a lack of privacy and hearing people snore and all that kind of thing, especially since we are not recommending anybody stay in shelters. And that's, whether or not the shelter is officially closed, it's not a great idea to be breathing the same air as someone outside of your household during COVID times all night long. So, of course, that cuts down on the capacity of those sites as well. So there's just the physical space in the campsite, and then there's privies.
Hang on a bit, Catherine. I was more talking about when the idea about physical distance is when they're actually on the trail itself between those sites. How do they, when they pass someone, for example, how do they make sure that they keep themselves safe? Are you suggesting any guidelines for that?
Yeah, so it's all the same things that folks have probably been hearing for many months now from the CDC. Keeping at least 6 feet of distance is a good thing to do even when you're outdoors, and wearing masks, especially just, I wouldn't expect anybody to have it on 24 hours a day, but when you are going to have to pass somebody in a narrow spot on the trail, it's good to have it just in your pocket or around your neck or something so you can throw that on, as much as a sign of respect to them as it is to protect yourself. We used to always recommend folks knuckle up for noro and give the fist bump or the elbow bump instead of shaking hands. And now we need to take that to another level of, not shaking hands, not even necessarily getting close enough to bump elbows. But if you're 2 trekking poles apart, that's probably a pretty good visual aid. If you reach out your trekking pole and they reach theirs out and they're just...
And poke somebody in the eye.
Yeah. That's pretty good way to keep track. But just, generally being cognizant of where you are. There's a lot of places where the trail is pretty narrow or it's really steep, and so it's kind of hard to pass to get around somebody without getting kind of close to them. So being prepared for that with the mask, and just giving folks space anywhere you can.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. But it's not necessarily that easy to do sometimes when you're just hiking past somebody. And obviously, I actually don't remember anybody shaking hands on the trail in 2014 or 2019 anyway. So that's a norovirus thing as much as anything else, isn't it? So they get to the shelters. The privies are closed, I understand, but they're not locked, are they? So one can still use them, or are they locked?
Generally, no, they're not. Most of them are not structures that you could put a padlock on. They're kind of open structures in a lot of cases anyway. And in those places where padlock was put on, it got broken off pretty quickly. So then you have issues with vandalism, people breaking doors down and stuff. So learned pretty early on in COVID that wasn't going to work even if we tried it. But I will say they're not being maintained in most places. Whether or not that's because the agency, like the Forest Service or the Park Service, hasn't been able to figure out kind of the safety guidelines that volunteers should be following to keep safe, or because the volunteers themselves are not willing to, dive into handling human waste.
And who can blame them, by the way?
Yeah.
It's a thankless task anyway. But that actually brings up the subject of volunteers. They are such an integral part of what goes on the trail, with the fact that most of them are probably my age or around my age, a lot of them around my age, in the late 60s, a lot of them must be concerned for their health as well. So is there not a knock-on effect, and are we getting less volunteers actually working on the trail?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another concern for sure, going forward with if we have a lot of impacts from heavy use of the trail, and especially from that crowding. The trail can take the same number of people much with fewer impacts if they just spread out. So if more folks do flip-flop hikes or the southbound itinerary, that kind of thing, it really takes a lot of the pressure off. But when you have 50 people a day starting for weeks on end, then you do have a lot of issues that we may not have the volunteer capacity to handle this year in the same way that we would in years past, just because there is a reduction.
Well, that's fine. So, and I totally understand that, and I don't blame anybody for not wanting to do it with all these sweaty hikers around anyway. But when it comes to the shelters themselves, obviously they shouldn't really go in the shelters. Has there been any provision made within the forest around those shelters to make more space, more tent spaces, or is it going to be as it was the last year and the year before? I'm
not aware of any efforts. I think most of our agency partners and the trail clubs are just doing what they can to keep up with regular maintenance rather than creating any new spaces. Within the national forest, you are allowed to disperse camp. So you're not breaking any rules if you find your own campsite, but we do want folks to be familiar with leave no trace guidelines, like being 200 feet away from water and from the trail, because the water riparian zones are extra sensitive to trampling of vegetation and can cause erosion and stuff like that if we compact the soil. So
sure.
Knowing about things like that, if you're going to select a campsite that's not kind of a established.
Okay. Well, I hadn't realized how, not so much you encourage, but you're kind of saying if you can find a campsite that's well off the trail, stays within the leave no trace guidelines, people can do that. And I'm sure people will do it. There's a danger to that, of course, especially in some of the more wilderness areas. They can go off there and get totally lost. I mean, people just have to be careful where, as always on the trail, have to be just careful where they are, don't they? Now, what about towns and I guess by extension, hitching and getting shuttles? There's going to be any of those,
Yeah, I would guess that it's going to be a little harder to get in and out of town this year, partly because I don't think as many people will be willing to pick up a hitchhiker. I don't think there will be as many folks out doing trail magic kind of ride, shuttling folks around. And I'm not sure what the landscape looks like this year in terms of the shuttle capacity for hostels and other folks who provide those shuttles. I think in general, this may be a good year to stretch out to do fewer resupplies. I know there's that famous stretch up in, is it New Jersey, New York, where you could go get a hoagie every day?
You can deli hop, no problem at all. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so maybe this isn't the year to deli hop. Maybe this is the year to try and go 4 or 5 days between resupply instead of 3 or 4. Just maybe the fewer times you have to figure out how to get a ride is fewer times that you need to worry about whether every time you do that, that's a possible point of exposure for both you and the person that you're getting a ride from. So,
and it's worth saying, when you do go into town, which you obviously will to resupply at some stage, just be aware that you're entering somebody else's town and make sure that you do have a mask, have it handy with you, and you use the darn thing, because you're respecting them. You're not looking after yourself. I personally have just been vaccinated today for the second time. I am now apparently fully safe, so I can go, can't I? Oh, no, I can't. I know. You told me I couldn't before. It's okay. So, and what sort of information can you provide, or do you not know? Is it a case-by-case basis for hostels and hotels? Are some accepting guests, accepting hikers? Because they may see hikers as a super spreader event themselves all the way up the trail.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't think there's any sort of coordinated way to know in advance, except to go town by town, and do your research as you go. So if I was out there, I would be calling ahead. Before I ever left one town, I'd be calling the next town to know what the landscape is in terms of, are the hostels open? And I would want to know what precautions they're taking. What is it, a shared bunk room? I would not want to sleep in a shared bunk room during COVID times, personally. I'm not vaccinated.
But you're Catherine, you're an essential worker. What are you talking about? You must be an essential worker. So, it is a case, as it always is, of using your bloody common sense and making sure that you approach it with a respect for others. And you have to do that on the trail anyway. And just be more mindful this year. I've got to tell you that the people who went in 2020, the ones I've interviewed and spoken to away from interviewing them, have said to me, even though, because I did ask the question, What was it like? Because you missed a lot of the community. You missed lots of the great things about being on the trail you actually missed out on. And not one of them has said to me so far they wish they'd done it another year. So I find that interesting because it was a unique experience, 2020. I just got a horrible feeling that 2021 may be a more difficult experience because of that, what I think is likely to be many more people on the trail. But I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it, as always. And thanks for being flexible enough to record again. And we'll speak soon, okay?
Sure. Can I put one more plug in for that atcamp.org website?
Go for it.
As a place to look for, look at the date that you want to start and see how many other folks are trying to start that day. And you might want to adjust your plans accordingly.
That's right. Okay. All right. Well, speak to you soon. And thanks for coming back.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Bye.
I hope you're getting a lot from these ATC segments. I'm sure that you're aware of how much the people I interview actually love this trail, and bad press that they sometimes get unfairly for the most part. It is hard to doubt the commitment that they all share about the trail. I've met Catherine personally, and her enthusiasm and straightforward explanation about Leave No Trace was one of the highlights of our Woods Hole trip last October. Now, and because I forgot to mention it last week, I'm calling the end of our Appalachian Trail necklace competition next Wednesday. So, if you've still not put in an entry, just answer Tina's question of which club has responsibility for maintenance around Tina's hostel, the Quarterway Inn. And when you've Googled that, just drop me a line at steve@hikingradionetwork.com and you'll join the others in the draw next Wednesday. Finally today, Larry Luxenburg illustrates what every thru-hiker learns on his or her journey. It's nothing to do with your gear, how strong you are. It's about your attitude. I'll see you next week. Lucky, lucky, lucky. Mental challenges and the importance of attitude. Keep on going, and the chances are that you will stumble on something, perhaps when you are least expecting it. I never heard of anyone ever stumbling on something sitting down. Charles F. Kettering. One lucky is for life, one for being on the trail, the third for good fortune along the way. Maybe no one has ever brought a better attitude to the trail than Paul, a lucky, lucky, lucky Hollowball. Where others saw problems, he saw opportunities. Where others merely complained of the black flies, he arranged sassafras leaves in a bandana and shooed them away. Others saw rainy days, he saw the sunshine in between. It's nice to have good equipment, be in superb shape and have pleasant companions, but what's really critical for a 2,000-miler is attitude. You could hike the whole trail with a rotten attitude, but you wouldn't enjoy it and probably wouldn't make it very far. Successful hikers are fiercely determined. They say things like, "It'll take more than one broken bone to stop me." The successful hikers are the ones who find goodness and joy even in the difficult times, who see beyond the misery to the beauty of nature and the comforts of trail society. They're the ones who know that the rain turns the forest into a magical wonderland and provides the rainbow that caps the day. Warren Doyle's well-known AT weather forecast is 1 nice day for hiking out of 5. But Jan Sacagawea Collins would wake up every day and say, "This is beautiful." Even if it were raining, she'd say, "This is the best day of my life." "Any day I'm out of doors is a good day," said Laurie, a travelling Wilbury, Mac. There's always something different on the trail. Veteran hikers advise rookies not to fight the trail, to accept it for what it is. The trail's not going to change, the argument goes, so you better change. The ones who don't survive are the ones who can't change the way the trail demands, said Jim Bald Eagle Owen. Wanda the Breeze Kurdziel says she doesn't want to look at maps that show how steep the day's hike is. "I take it as if I'm discovering it. If it's there, I'm going to do it, no matter what." It's easy to fall into the trap of criticising the route the trail takes, or to question why it was relocated to a particular spot, but such thinking only frustrates a hiker. Often the reason for the trail's location is not readily apparent. Perhaps the land isn't in public hands, or there has been a compromise between competing interests. "The trail taught me about patience," said Dick Lotek Cieslik. "I was edgy and nervous and short-tempered before the trail. You can't push the mountains around, you have to learn to adjust to them." Hikers say that it's easier to enjoy yourself on the trail if you have firm goals in mind, whether it's hiking the trail end to end, making friends, or learning wildflowers. If you have goals, they say, you won't be persuaded to do things you don't want to do. Many hikers walk too fast to keep up with friends, which makes them more prone to injury, frustration and defeat. Jimmy B. Bodmer, hiked with serious injuries to keep up with others, and he regretted it. What goes through a hiker's mind on the trail? Even if a hiker has a partner, he typically walks many miles alone, perhaps joining others at breaks and meal times. Few hikers will actually say they get bored on the trail, though some admit that the miles can get monotonous. A hiker's senses can become saturated by the beauty continually surrounding him. Most hikers think about food, then they think about it some more. What to have for dinner tonight? What's the heaviest food left in my pack? Should I eat it now? Am I due a snack? What should I eat when I hit town? Other details of daily life get some attention too. Where should I sleep tonight? Am I going to make the mileage I figured on? What's the trail like up ahead? Where shall I put my foot? Where can I find water? Dan Nellis liked to focus on different interests as he walked. Sometimes he played mind games. He tried to inject humour into his journey by celebrating each month on the trail with an anniversary cake. Some hikers like to invent word games, such as figuring out different phrases that AT could stand for. Addictive torture, for example. Others have creative daydreams. Wayne Selman once wrote in the AT News, "I am a dreamer. Hiking on the trail, I forget the worries, the cares, the problems of the world. My main concern is for food to eat, water to drink, and a place to sleep. On the trail, I have written several books. I've started numerous businesses, sold some, and made millions. I've sailed the 7 seas, travelled the whole world. I've courted the beautiful, the rich, from all corners of the globe, though my wife is still number 1. I've owned everything from mopeds and limousines to airplanes and yachts. I've been counsellor to foreign governments and have helped make laws in our own land. I've eaten the best cuisine in all countries. Again, of course, all of this has happened in my dream world while hiking the trail." Many hikers, especially the young, think about what they want to do with their lives after the hike. It's not often that one has 5 months away from the distractions and pressures of the daily grind to take stock of one's life. Jeff Hansen finds that many people come to the trail after some emotional distress. "We've had people who've lost family members in accidents, and the trail becomes their family," he said. "I think it's a great idea to use this to sort things out." He believes the trail simplifies a person's life and lets him get closer to his innermost thoughts. A simple walk in the woods for the afternoon does that. 6 months of it has to be that much better, he said. Hikers sometimes wonder whether it's self-indulgent to hike the trail. Many have worked hard all their lives and find it odd to be without a job. "Sometimes I question myself, is this being responsible?" said Laurie Mack. "I was talking to the postmaster in Linden, Virginia, and I said, 'Are there a lot of hikers going through?' He said, 'Too many. They should be out working like the rest of us.' A small part of me wondered whether I should be working or in school." "It's not self-indulgent unless you want to say that living life is self-indulgent," said Mike Hago Harrington. "What motivates through hikers to keep going in the face of misery, pain and exhaustion?" After 30 days on the trail, Keith Wolf Kimball had endured 26 days of rain. He'd severely injured his ankle. He'd had almost no company. The black flies were terrible. Why didn't he drop off the trail? Despite the problems, he enjoyed being on his own in the wilderness. He could sense that he was growing up and that this was where he should be. And like many other hikers, he didn't want to face the embarrassment of going home after failing to achieve what he set out to do. "Almost every day I thought of dropping off," said Holly Doc Leeds, a 1990 thru hiker. "I wasn't even on the trail for 10 days when I wrote home that this was like a job. I get up every day, pack my gear, hike from 9 to 5, make dinner, go to sleep. And then the whole thing starts again. The pain never ends. It was just in a different place every day. But I hate quitting. I just couldn't conceive of the words, I quit. When I started, I didn't legitimately think I was going to be able to finish the trail. I hoped I could, and I planned to finish, but I didn't think I could. I was surprised to learn that my body had limits far beyond what I'd imagined. I could walk all day in the rain and cold and not be miserable. It taught me that limits are most often what's between my ears and nothing more. "It gets in your blood," said Reese, the Sagwagon Lukai Jr., who hiked the trail in sections over 13 years. "It becomes such an integral part of you, like eating, sleeping, breathing. You just don't separate the trail from the rest of your being. It's an opportunity to clean out the cobwebs. I had an intense experience as a CPA. I had to find an escape. Piecing the trail together was part of the challenge. By chance, he finished the trail at Sugarloaf Mountain in Maine on August the 14th, 1987, the same day a ceremony was being held there to mark the golden anniversary of the trail's completion. Initially, the idea of doing the whole trail motivated Greg Pooh Nertner. To keep myself going, I'd tell myself I have to finish this thing, but that wore off quickly. I discovered I love hiking, and that's what kept me going. It's hard to hike the whole trail if your only motivation is that you want to finish. Others do enjoy the challenge of trying to meet the goal for its own sake. Difficulties encountered along the way simply make reaching the goal more rewarding. It takes a willingness to endure, said Mike Hago-Harrington. People expect a feeling of total freedom and the chance to be goofing off and frolicking in the wilderness. But you've got to hike from early morning till late in the day, or you're not going to do it in 1 year. The weather window is not that wide. It's a job in a way. You're going to have bad days and good days. It's part of life. Many hikers set intermediate goals to make the distance seem less forbidding. It can be overwhelming to set foot on Springer Mountain and know that you are 5 million steps away from Katahdin. When you're in Georgia, Maine may seem about as far away as China, but the Smokies seem like a short hop away, and that's someplace you've always wanted to go. After that, Hot Springs, Roan Mountain, and later Damascus creep into range. Then there's Shenandoah, Harper's Ferry, the Hudson River, and New England. In the south, thru-hikers seem a little nervous, a little flabby. By the time they've been on the trail a month or two, they're calmer and leaner. There's not much left besides muscle. As their bodies and packs have slimmed down, their minds have changed too. Warren Doyle likes to say they've shed their emotional fat. They've learned patience and fortitude and had their faith in the essential goodness of mankind restored. They've learned that every time they see a new hiker coming down the trail, it's a new friend. They've learned that the barriers of age, occupation and geography mean nothing here. Moreover, they've learned new diversions, climbing fire towers, jumping in swimming holes, studying in nature. Thru-hikers are often the only ones in their families who are serious hikers. It's sometimes difficult for their family and friends to understand what they're doing. My family definitely thought I was nuts, said Bob Sweet Peeler Foot Hill. I don't know how I turned out this way. None of my relatives are backpackers. After the trail, they met some of my friends and heard my stories, and they realised I'm not the only crazy person. Now they appreciate what I did in my youth. Profile: Warren Doyle. One weekend I stayed at Hemlock Overlook Centre for Outdoor Education, which Warren runs. I told him I'd like to talk when it was convenient. He said, let's make it 4 a.m. so we won't be disturbed. I thought he was joking, but Ron Keel assured me he was serious. At exactly 4 a.m. I heard Warren's voice across the bunk room. We proceeded to talk in the cramped office off the dining hall kitchen. At 5:30, Indiana John stuck his head in the door and I joked, I thought there wouldn't be any interruptions. By 6:50, Warren rested his head on the desk, weary after 3 hours of non-stop conversation. Warren Doyle is a familiar figure to nearly everyone who's come close to the Appalachian Trail in the last 20 years. He's hiked the complete trail 9 times, and he's not finished yet. He's continually hiking sections, attending meetings of hikers, showing his slides. His friendships and influence extend the length of the trail. It is not easy to be neutral about Warren, for he can be a devoted friend or a determined adversary. His appearance is deceiving. He does not have the lean, hungry, almost emaciated look that one comes to expect in a long-distance backpacker. Nor does he have the detached manner of an academic, even though he is a professor of Appalachian Studies at George Mason University in Virginia. He has more the fiery mien of a rebel leader preparing to man the ramparts or a dissident tweaking the KGB. At 43, however, he is mellowing somewhat, sidestepping some of the battles he would have waged only a few years ago. People question nearly everything about Warren, his beliefs, his sanity, his motives, but no one questions his love for the AT. He has a family and many friends and interests, but his devotion to the AT is boundless. When I like something, I approach it with intensity, he said. A testimony to Warren's gifts as an organiser, his energy and his strong personality, is that he was able to form and keep together Alder, the largest group in the country devoted to long-distance backpacking. It's hard to organise a bunch of antisocial individualists who have little patience for the paperwork and meetings that groups require. Many are cavalier about answering mail and telephones, and some don't even have permanent addresses. His slideshow, polished over the years, displays his intensity, commitment and showmanship. He runs around, he sings, he recites poetry, he exhorts. It is a unique performance, for most thru-hikers could no more sing before a large group than fly under their own power. Hemlock Overlook has sprouted practically from scratch since he went there 8 years ago. Now, nearly 30,000 students each year attend programs, making it one of the largest outdoor education centres in the country. Warren also runs a canoeing concession on Bull Run, near the Civil War battlefield. Hemlock is no doubt the largest single employer of 2,000 milers, with a dozen on staff at any one time. At Hemlock, every incoming group hears the speech, often given by Warren, which stresses the need for cooperation over competition. His introduction to hiking did not suggest a long-term interest. After his freshman year of college, he went climbing in the White Mountains, carrying a duffel bag loaded with cans of food and soda. Despite his poor preparations, he was amazed at the grandeur of everything, the indescribable feeling. From then on, he would go camping whenever he could. As a graduate student in 1972, he hiked on the Long Trail in Vermont. He learned a lot by suffering. In his cheap boots, he developed blisters the size of $half. He became dehydrated. Because it was mid-May, he encountered swarms of black flies. Later that summer, he ventured into the Maine wilderness, climbing Katahdin. At the Herd Brook lean-to, he met a 2,000-miler nearing the finish. That sparked the idea of a thru-hike, he said. Meanwhile, his social conscience had awakened. After his junior year, he worked in the mountains of Jamaica. Later, he worked for poet Don West, who founded the Appalachian South Folklife Center in Pipestem, West Virginia, to educate mountain people about their heritage. Warren found that in both places, good people worked hard but were mired in poverty. He started to question society. He also started to read about primitive societies, their rites of passage and their trials of fire. I found nature to be very neutral, with no prejudices, he said. It was my arena for personal growth. When his older sister died suddenly at age 15, he felt he had to accomplish enough for two people. When he decided on the AT as his rite of passage, he included the added challenge of walking the trail in the shortest time. In 1973, at age 23, he set off on his first thru-hike. His father, Warren Sr., met him in Cloverdale in southern Virginia and continued to meet him until he passed Gorham, New Hampshire. Warren Sr. was concerned that his son had lost too much weight, so he began to cook for him and help around camp. It made a big psychological difference having his father along, Warren said. He ended the hike in record time, 66 1/3 days, averaging 30 miles a day. Back at school, Warren organised a series of day hikes to do the Connecticut AT over 7 Sundays. A core group formed, including his future wife, Ginger. On the last hike, people decided to walk the whole distance, 56 miles, in one day. 12 people prepared for this super hike for 2 months. Warren found tremendous energy in the group. It was a valuable learning experience, he said, and he began wondering, if all this can happen in one day, how much could a longer hike achieve? 2 weeks later, he had a dream. He saw a group of hikers with headlights walking from Georgia to Maine. It felt so right, he said. I couldn't get back to sleep. He had already started a doctoral dissertation on post-secondary aspirations of rural districts in Vermont. He dropped that topic and lost a grant. Instead, he began planning a group thru-hike. It would be the first group of more than 2 people to hike the AT. As a practical afterthought, he decided he would study the group dynamics for his new dissertation topic. He put his University of Connecticut students through 2 semesters of preparation and planning, complete with classroom discussions and practice hikes. Warren had acquired from Don West the belief that people could unite to achieve a common goal. One of the group's objectives was for all 19 people to finish the trail together, and they did. For this hike, Warren developed the concept of having a support van meet the group nearly every day. That way, people could hike with day packs, walking more miles each day and squeezing in the entire trail between the spring and fall semesters. I had a vision of a new world where people walk together and leave no one behind, he said. While many 2,000 milers give moving testimony to the profound positive effects of a thru-hike, these effects have proven difficult to measure. In Warren's doctoral dissertation, standard psychological tests were unable to measure changes in students resulting from the 1975 group thru-hike. But Warren could point to claims by participants that powerful changes had indeed taken place. They were more confident in their physical endurance, mental discipline, and tolerance of other people. Before his second group thru-hike in 1977, he created an interdisciplinary course covering the Appalachians, flora and fauna, mental and physical preparations for the trail, and other topics. This was the only one of his 4 expeditions from which people dropped out, one each in Vermont and New Hampshire. He also led groups in 1980 and 1990. A member of his 1975 group, Kirk Sinclair, led another group hike in 1983. A group scheduled to hike in 1995 began forming in 1992. Testaments to Warren's physical feats are a staple of trail legends. Albie Pokrov was hiking near Pearisburg, Virginia, when he ran into Warren. Warren asked if Albie wanted to drive to Connecticut for a slideshow. Albie said he didn't want to be gone so long. His trail friends would hike ahead in the meantime. Warren promised to get him back by the next morning. Warren did all but 1 hour of the 28 hours of driving, putting on a 90-minute slideshow in between. Warren is known for being among the most frugal of hikers. Before his last thru-hike, he went to the Salvation Army and bought 6 pairs of sneakers for $1 a pair and used only 3. Katahdin is my holy mountain. I try to climb it at least twice a year, Warren said. He still does long day hikes, including an annual Damascus by Dawn 64-mile trip. Another of his trips was the Winter Wipeout, in which he climbed the 7 highest peaks in New England and New York in 5 days. Warren has now completed the 89 times, including his early speed hike, 4 group hikes and 4 section hikes. Even still, I always see new things on the trail. That's why I keep walking, he said. It's healthy for me. It's a leisure activity that's also goal-oriented. That's my religion. That's my faith. He loves swimming in the streams along the way, playing, having fun. It's a giant playground, he said. Every day I can pick out 3 or 4 wonderful things. I wouldn't want to hike the trail if it wasn't fun.